So to continue with what we have left, now we saw different kind of functionalities that we can use within a playbook, like creating a tag, you can define a condition, and then you can define a particular time when you want to run, like what is it has to run, whether you want to run it in a loop. Like that, we were trying to see different functionalities within a playbook that is given, correct? Now, moving ahead, if you're really getting into a production machine, and in that machine, now if you have a particular group of machines in which you can use the machine for different kind of functionality, right? Then for that case, you cannot keep writing many playbooks differently for each of the machine. That is one problem that we will be getting. And the other thing, suppose a couple of machines have to share the same kind of functionality, then how is that you're going to define it? Because the scenario, what I'm saying is, you can have a machine which can have different functionalities. Now, if you try to write a different playbook for different functionality, now for a particular machine, if I want to get a configuration that you want, then I have to run more than one playbook, so that specific state whatever you have given, you will be giving it. So that is when, as you keep growing the number of configurations for a machine, then having many playbooks will be difficult to maintain. And the same thing, if you think about, rather than using many playbooks, if you are going to define everything in one single playbook, then once again, what will be the problem? The problem is that as you keep writing more and more code in the same playbook, it is also not good, because if you have one playbook with thousands of lines, then it is going to be just like a program or a script where maintenance will be difficult. So to overcome these kind of scenarios, what we can do is, we can do a concept called as role, where roles is nothing but you are going to segregate the content of the playbook into different smaller and smaller files, and then ask the playbook to use whatever the content that you want. Once again, roles means, instead of putting all the content into a playbook, is my voice clear? All right. So roles means, rather than putting up all the content in one single playbook, what you can do is, you can divide the content of the playbook into separate files, where you will have separate directory structure, and you will put all the content divided into separate directories. So that is what we are going to call it as a role. For example, if you go to a movie, a single person will be doing dual role or more than that, right? Wherein in one role he will be behaving it differently, and in the other role he'll be doing a different action. The same way, now a single playbook can be divided into many directories in such a way that you can use the same playbook to work on different kind of state of the machine. Okay, so such a concept is what we call it as roles. So role means, all you have to think is, rather than writing everything in one file, you will split it up into different smaller and smaller directories, and in that you will store everything. So whatever you want to pick up, you will specify that, and based on that the playbook will be running. Now, if you recall, yesterday we used something called as include, right? Pretty much include was the same thing. What did we do in include? Rather than putting up everything in the playbook, we created a new file, and in that new file we try to add something, and wherever you include that file, the content of the file which you are including will be getting here. This is something exactly in the same way, but now think, roles is much more advanced concept of include, wherein there are many other advantages that we can obtain by roles. Because when you are working in an organization, you will have to write many complex playbooks, and the same machine can be used for different functionality. So that is how, by using the concept of roles, you can choose what and all you want to put in a playbook, and use the playbook to run accordingly based on what different state that you want to maintain. So that is how. it is little more advanced topic on what you are going to work on the include statement. Okay, that's what we call it as roles. So simply once again, consider roles as splitting the playbook content into smaller and smaller directories and putting it inside. And whenever you want a particular content, then you tell to the playbook which exact directory or the roles that you want to take, and automatically it will be trying to take everything from it. Okay. So when you are going to implement the role, then we have to follow a certain standard directory structure, because as I said, role is all about dividing the content of the playbook and putting up into some smaller and smaller directories. So that way, when you are working on the concept of roles, then we will be following a particular directory structure. So let's say you have a big playbook. Okay, now let's call that playbook as master. It's just the name that I'm giving, where master.yml or YAML is a playbook. Now for this playbook, if you're trying to set up the concept of role, then on the same directory where the playbook is available, you will try to create a folder first called role, and under the roles you will give the name of the role that you want to work on. Okay, so that for each role you will be giving a specific directory structure and some contents in it. So that way, under the roles folder you will be creating one more folder that will be acting as the name of the role that you want the playbook to work accordingly. Okay, so like this, inside the roles folder you can create as many directory as you want, where each one of them will be treated separately as a different role. Now inside the specific role folder we will be having further folders with the name of whatever sections that we have in the playbook. Now if you recall, playbook can be divided into different sections like task, target, variables, handlers, right? So that way now you can try to divide all of them with the same naming convention as how you are going to use it. So that way now you will be creating a separate folder called tasks under this role, and whatever the tasks that you want to put, you will be giving it inside it. Then if you want to define a variable, then you create a variables or vars folder, and inside that you put the content specific to this role. And if you have any handler that you want to use, then specifically create a folder called handlers under this role and put everything under it. Okay, so like this, for each role you will be creating further inside it different folders with the name of what exactly you are going to use. Okay, and inside these folders, if you want to give any data, then you will be using a name of the file called main.yaml. So this is again a standard where under each folder you will be creating a file called main.yaml, and in that you are going to define all the specific data. Suppose if you want to give all the tasks related to this role, then you will give it under the main.yaml available inside the tasks folder. Same way, if you want to define a variable, then you define it under the main.yaml in the variables folder. So like that, whatever that you're going to give in the playbook, that content you put it under the folder, and in that specifically under the file name called main.yaml. Okay, so this is how we are going to maintain the directory structure. Okay, so before we get into it, let's try to understand this. Is that clear on what do you mean by role and what exactly are we going to do using role, where we are going to maintain the directory structure in this way? Okay. So now if you are creating a role, so first thing is, let's create a playbook for that separately. Okay, now let's assume we had the folder called playbooks, right? Now inside this we tried all those things, so let's create a file where I want to call it as master. So this is the name of my playbook, that's it. Okay, now here what we will define is the standard target section, whatever that you want to define, so that we will put it inside here. So now I'll try to put the standard details on what is it. We will try to say on what is the machine that you are going to use, and then what is the user ID, and then as which account that you want to run, the sudo enabled, and what type of connection that you want to do. Okay, so we'll give all these things by default here. Okay, now once this is done, now if you want to give all the other data for it, then we'll have to create a folder called roles. So first, in the same directory as your playbook is there, create a directory called roles. Okay, then go inside the roles, and inside the roles first create the name of the role that you want to use. Now let's assume that the playbook or whatever I'm going to use is basically used for setting up a list of web servers. Okay, because we were seeing the Apache as example. So if I'm using to configure certain web server, then let me give the name of the role as the web server. Here I'll call it as web servers. So if you go further, you can see under our playbooks folder where we are maintaining all the playbook, we have created a folder called roles, and inside that we have one more folder called as web server, where this is the name of the role. Hari, I think there's a problem from your mic. Can you disconnect and connect it again? Yep. So this is how you will be first creating the structure for the roles. And now when you want to define something, you will be using this particular folder under which you will be creating all the subfolders, and then create a file called main.yaml and put all the details inside it. Okay, so that way now if I want to use this particular role, then I will use a keyword called roles and give the name of that particular directory that we have defined. So here I have created a folder called roles, and if I want to use this, then go back to your main playbook or the YAML file, that is master, and in this now if I give okay, so here if I say roles and followed by that if I give the name of the folder what we have created, then what we are saying is for this playbook, whatever the details that it needs, it has to pick up from this role called web server. So that is how, rather than defining everything on the main or the master YAML file, we are going to define this with respect to role, so that you can choose which role you want to define. So that way now I'm going to specify that this is the role for this playbook I have to use. Okay, so now once you have specified the name of the role, which is in fact actually a folder which is available under the roles folder, correct? So now if you go to the roles and web server, you can see there is nothing available. So with respect to that, now if you try to run your Ansible playbook, what it will do, it will try to just run the information, because in your playbook all you have defined is only the target section, and in that you have told to use the role called web server. And as of now, under the web server role, there is nothing that has been defined. So that is why it is just trying to gather the facts. That's the only thing that it is doing. Now, as we keep adding the details into the web server, automatically everything will be taken for this master playbook. Okay. So if I have to add a task, what is that we have to do? Now, the concept and the logic will be the same, where suppose if I want to now add a particular task to our role called as web server, then what we will do first, under our roles folder in the specific name of the role which we have included, try to create a folder called tasks, and inside that you give a file name called main.yaml, and in that you're going to define whatever the task you want to do. Okay, now let's give one simple task and see how it is going to work. So what I'm trying to do for this roles called web server, I'm trying to define a task. So for this, first under this roles folder, we will create a folder called tasks, and inside that folder we'll create a file called main.yaml. So this is the standard, and in this I will just give the detail like this. Okay, I don't have to tell that this is the task. Now remember, if you are defining everything in your playbook, we have to create a section called as task, and under this we were giving. But now instead of giving it in the playbook directly, what we are doing is we are trying to create a role, and for that role I'm trying to create a task section, and that I will put it into a file called main.yaml inside this particular web server. That is the role which will be included inside the playbook, so that now when you run this playbook is going to include this web server role, and in the web server role you have one folder called tasks which has a content under the main.yaml, so that will get executed directly. Okay, now let me open one more session. Okay, so now if I run Ansible playbook and the name of our playbook, so it is going to call this, and in that we have included a web server which has one task defined under it. So this will be automatically taking it. Oh, sorry. It is under playbooks. Okay, we have the structure, and in this, if you run, so you can see now we haven't defined this task called as installing Apache, right? But how did it take? That is because we have included the role inside the playbook, and in this role I have given a task, so that as you keep adding any number of tasks that you want, everything will be put up and it will be considered directly by the role, and that will be taken considered into the playbook. So that is how, if you just maintain this directory structure, as you keep on adding any number of tasks into this main.yaml under the task folder, it will be considering everything. So you don't have to explicitly say use this. If you just include the role, automatically if you maintain the structure, it will be using it. Now as many tasks as I want, I can keep adding it into this particular tasks folder in the main.yaml. Suppose if I want to add one more task, and let's not just use the task, whatever the concepts that we have been seen so far, like condition, looping, everything can be done here. The only difference is, rather than defining it directly on the playbook, we are trying to split it as role, and inside that you are trying to define it under the tasks folder specifically. Okay, so now for example, if I want to give condition like what we did last time, if I have to give the condition, the only thing that I have to do is what are the tasks that you want to give the condition, and based on that you can give it here. So now I'm giving two tasks in which there is one task which will call the yum package, and this will get executed only if the condition of the operating system is matching Red Hat. The same thing, there is one more task called installing Apache on Ubuntu, and that's going to call the apt. And now this is going to get called only if the condition that the operating system is Debian. So just like how we had the details earlier, where all these things were defined directly in a playbook, instead of that we are trying to put it under the role. Okay, so let's try that also. Now I'll open up the same tasks, under that the main.yaml. Here let's put the value, and there are two tasks now, correct? And if I run the same playbook again, you can see that it is going to call this only because the operating system what we have is a Red Hat. So that's why it is trying to run this, whereas the other one is skipping because the condition is not matched. That's how, without even telling it, if you just maintain the tasks in the main.yaml under the task folder for that role, it will be automatically taking. So whatever concept that we have thought earlier, everything like running it one time, synchronous way, looping, condition, everything can be directly put under this main.yaml inside the tasks folder. So that inside this main.yaml on the task folder, anything that you define will be treated as the task for this playbook, because you have included the complete web server itself. Okay, so it's just a enhancement by dividing everything properly. Getting it? Now the same thing, suppose if you want to have a variable, once again, instead of defining it directly in the playbook, you can define it with respect to the role. And now if you want to use a variable, then for this particular role in this folder, you create a new folder called as variables. Okay, and under that, once again, you have to create a file called as main.yaml, and in that you define all the variables that you want to use. Okay, now let's do that. So now I'm inside the tasks folder. I'm going to come out of it. So under this web servers role, I have one folder called task. So now, since I'm interested to define a variable, I'll create a variable folder, and inside this we will create a main.yaml once again, so that it will be trying to pick it automatically. Okay, now when I'm defining here, let me put two variables like this, where there is one variable, I'm saying it as Red Hat, and the value for that is HTTPD, and I'm saying the package name for Debian is Apache 2. And now we will use this inside our tasks main.yaml, so that it will automatically use, where you don't have to specify everything. Okay, now this is put under the main.yaml of the vars or the variable folder or the section. Now if you go back to your actual task section, and in that, if you want to use this, just replace the value with this variable so that it will automatically consider it. Okay, now let me go back to the tasks folder, and in this, if I open the main.yaml, and now for example, instead of this, if I want to use the variable, and if I do this, what will happen? So what we have done, we have just telling that there will be a variable by the name of Red Hat Apache, and you have to use it, and that we have defined in the variable section under the main.yaml of that. Okay, so that is how, when you now run the playbook, automatically. It will first read the role, and in that role you have specified two folders. One is task, another one is variable. Whatever the content that is available in this and available in this, both of them will be read together. And in that, in the tasks, you have asked to use this variable, which is actually defined under the variable folder in the main.yaml. Okay, so that is how it is going to use it automatically. Okay, do you see? So once again, it is the same thing as what we have seen so far in the previous session, but the difference is, rather than defining everything directly on one single playbook, we are trying to give it in a structured format based on the roles, whatever that we are going to use. Getting it? On how do we define a variable for the same playbook? The only thing we have to do is create a separate folder called vars, and in that create a file called main.yaml, and whatever the definition of variables you want, you can put it inside it. So the same concept. Now, in the same way, now what if you want to use a handler section? If you recall, once again, we were using a handler section where whenever a changes happen for a particular task, it has to call another task, right? So that way, now if you want to call a particular task as a handler section, then we will have to create a new folder called handlers, and in that, whatever the specific handler section that you want, you will be putting it up there. Okay, so let's do that first. So now, first thing what we will do is, we will go to the tasks folder. Okay, and in this main.yaml, first we will have to add an entry called notify, correct? So whatever that you want to add, you can add notify. Now let me try to remove this just to be on the simpler side. So I'm going to say use the package as httpd, and in this I'll say notify. Okay, so I'm just going to add the notify. So I'll say notify, and what does that have to do? Let's say I want to call a task for the service to restart. Okay, so I can say service restart. So the notify is restart Apache. Okay, so this is what I'm going to give. Now the same name of the task will be put under the handler section. So for that, now we have to create one more folder called handlers, and inside this we will create a main.yaml. Okay, and in this what you have to do is specify what exactly is the task that you want to do. So now here we have given restart httpd, right? So that is the same thing that you have to give there. So under this we will give the name as whatever that we have given, and then what is that you want to do here. So pretty much we are interested to restart Apache by calling a service. So that way we will use the same concept of service name and then the state. So if I say service name is httpd and the state is restarted. Okay, so pretty much again, if you notice, it's the same thing what we did in the previous session directly on a particular playbook. Okay, so to see it again, this is the handler section where there is one task called as restart Apache. Now the same thing, if you go to the tasks main.yaml, I have added the same name where after completing this, if this is completed successfully, then we have to call this particular task, which will be triggered as a handler only if this is successful. And the definition of this, I'm giving it separately under a handlers folder, and in that a file called main.yaml. So make sure the name whatever that you're giving here is the same name what you have used. Okay, now with this, let's try to run the whole playbook. So quickly, what I'll do is I'll try to remove the Apache just to make sure that that will run the handler section. Okay, now let's try to run this. So now you can see that based on how you have installed, it will try to call the dependency that is the handler section. So here you can see it is calling the install Apache, that is this particular one. Since the operating system is Red Hat and the Apache is not installed, it is installing. And after this, it is trying to notify by calling this particular task, which is available under the handler sections main.yaml, and that is what it is going to call. Whereas this task, it is trying to skip because the operating system is not Debian. Okay, getting it? Once again, whatever the definitions that we want, we are not giving directly on this playbook called master.yaml. Instead, we have defined a role, and under that we are defining all these things. Getting it? So this is how now you can split a particular role and give whatever directory that you want, and you can use everything in it based on what are the different kind of roles that you want. Okay, so the major advantage now is the same playbook. Now I can create many roles as I want and keep adding what and all roles that I want to use. Okay, so rather than using only one hard-coded content, I can divide now the contents of the playbook into role, and you can choose what role you want to use, so that whatever the role that you have defined, it will be trying to use only the details or the contents accordingly within that role. Getting it? Did you get what is a role? Okay. So now when you are defining a role, I said you have to make sure you create a folder called roles in the same directory as where you are working. So that will be the default way of working. Suppose if you do not want to keep the roles folder in the same directory as where you have the playbook, then we can create the roles folder, but the structure has to be maintained, remember. But I can create the same roles folder in somewhere else. But if you are trying to use it, then what we need to do is in our ansible.cfg, if you recall, this is the configuration file, right? So in that we will have to add the path where exactly it is used. So if you see, there will be a variable called roles path, to which if you add the directory where you are trying to keep the roles structure or the directory, then when you run the Ansible, it will try to use the roles from this specific directory. So on this machine, if you go to etc Ansible and what is it? We have to use the ansible.cfg. Okay, in this, if you search for roles, there is one folder which is commented, and because of that, when we run the playbook, on the same directory, if there is a folder called roles, it is going to pick up. Suppose if you want to maintain the roles separately in some other directory, then you have to enable this and add the value of where exactly the roles directory is available, inside which you have all the roles. Okay, so this is how you maintain the standard directory structure, where whatever roles that you're creating, the folder will be always in the same directory as where you are working with the playbook. But if you want, you can still choose it to keep it in some other directory. It is still possible to do. Getting it? Clear so far on what is the role? Okay. Now let me stop it because I think Satish has to go for his work. So tomorrow there's only a couple of things more, because what we saw now is just one playbook, and in that, I mean, one role. Suppose the actual use cases, when you have many roles, we will try to define in the same way. Just like how we had one role, we will try to define many role, and we will tell to the playbook on what exactly you want to use and when you have to use. So those kind of things we will try to see tomorrow. Okay, and there are a couple of more small things, and I'll show you that also tomorrow. Okay, and sorry that today I had to start late. Tomorrow pretty much will stick to the same time, 8:30. Any questions on what is role? So roles is nothing but dividing the complete content of a playbook into a ordered structure, wherein with respect to a role, you can define a specific task or a variable or a handler section, and whatever that you have defined inside the role, and if you include that role in a playbook, everything will be considered directly. So that is how in your playbook, you don't have to write everything. All you have to do is pretty much try to include that particular role that you want to use, and based on that, it will be trying to use all the contents that you have internally. Okay. Okay. Now